Okay, well, I'm a sucker for punctuality, so it is now 7:15, and at least on the East Coast, not sure where everyone is logging in from. So if you are in another time zone, welcome as well. This is Finding Your Ideal You, Navigating the College Search Process. I figured it would be a good opportunity in the current situation that we all face, where especially high school juniors would be typically this time of year getting information about the college search process and how to begin that process, and some tips and tricks to navigating researching colleges, and what types of colleges they should be looking at, where they should be looking, how they should be looking. And given that for, I'm sure, many folks, those opportunities have gone away, figured this would be a nice opportunity to do so in a virtual way. This presentation is something that has been developed over many years, and doing panels and other presentations to high school students all across the country, and will hopefully be useful to you as you think about the college search process. It is being recorded, so if you don't catch the beginning and want to come back and start over, or there's something that particularly struck you and you couldn't remember it, by all means do come back, and the recording will be stored on the Salve Admit Guy virtual site on WebEx. So you'll be able to find that information again. But as we get started, you may be wondering who this guy is. Who's this talking head on your screen? My name is Jim Fowler, and I am currently the Vice President for Enrollment Management at Salve Regina University in beautiful Newport, Rhode Island. I've been doing this college thing for about 25 years at a very diverse variety of institutions. I've had the privilege in my career of working at big schools, small schools, public and private, from the most selective colleges and universities in the country all the way to open enrollment institutions. And that has allowed me to see really the breadth and depth of higher education, and to understand that this whole college search process is really about fit. It's not about trying to get into the most selective college or university you can get into. It's about finding the school that is right for you. And so that's the frame or lens through which we're going to be approaching this presentation this evening. If, of course, after the presentation you have additional questions for me, or you want to ask me more about the college search, you want to learn a little bit more about just colleges in general, I am at Salve Admit Guy on Twitter and sometimes Instagram, where you'll see lots of information about colleges in general, how colleges operate. You'll also see a lot of posts about my passions, which are soccer and singing and theater, and occasionally my kids when I happen to be in a position to like them on any given day. So glad you're all here, and I hope that you will find this presentation useful and helpful. By all means, if you have questions throughout the presentation, do put it in the chat box. If you can use the chat box, that's great. If you happen to use the Q&A box, I'll get to it. But it's easier if I can just manage one box at a time. So the chat box works really well. So what are we talking about tonight? What is Ideal You? Well, Ideal You is basically the concept that regardless of who you are, there's probably a college or university out there that is going to be a very, very good match for you. But in order to find that college, it requires a bit of self-reflection. You don't just go into this process, pick a bunch of schools to apply to, and expect to end up at the right place. You have to be very introspective, know yourself, and be willing to ask hard questions about yourself and what you want from your collegiate experience. What's important to know is it's not necessarily a school that you've already heard from or that others have recommended to you. It's really what we're talking about is finding that place where you're most likely to achieve your academic and personal potential. And so that's what we're trying to get at today, trying to find what we would call your ideal you. And if we were doing this in a more traditional environment where I'd be in an auditorium or in a classroom with a lot of students and parents, typically I would take you through an exercise that I call the PEPSI challenge. And so if you're a parent paying attention to this, you've probably heard of the PEPSI challenge before. I haven't seen it utilized in commercials in many, many years. So kids that are high school students that are watching this presentation probably have no idea what I'm talking about. But once upon a time, Pepsi had this great ad campaign where they said, "Oh, we're going to take the Pepsi challenge," and they'd put 2 cups in front of people, and they'd cover up the cups and say, "Drink each one and tell us which one you like the best." And if you thought it was one, it was really the other, and it really got the attention of the public. Our Pepsi challenge is going to be a little bit different, and what I would usually do in an auditorium setting is I would ask everybody to stand up. And then I'd ask everyone to close their eyes, and I'd ask them to imagine that they were on a beach on a really hot summer day. Hopefully we'll all have an opportunity to do that again soon. And you're thirsty, and so you happen to have this really great cooler that is filled with every possible soft drink you can imagine. And so if you think about that, if you think about that cooler and that thirsty you have, think to yourself, would you select a good old fashioned Coca-Cola classic? And I would tell people, if you chose the Coca-Cola classic, go ahead and sit down. And then I'd say, what if you would choose just run-of-the-mill mainstream Pepsi? And then those people that would choose that would sit down. And then I would say, if you would pick any other number of sodas out there on the market, stay standing. And I ask everybody to open their eyes, and inevitably what people would see is that about 10% or so of the audience would have sat down on Coca-Cola. Another about 10% or so of the audience would have sat down on Pepsi, and everybody else would be still standing. And what we're trying to illustrate here is that when we approach the college search process, a lot of people think that there is only a small set of schools that they should be focused on. So what Coke represents here is really all of the big flagship state universities. So what do I mean by flagship states? They're usually the top school in each state, the school that the state typically puts the majority of their resources into. So a place like UMass Amherst, University of Connecticut Storrs, University of Michigan Ann Arbor, University of Wisconsin Madison, University of North Carolina Chapel Hill. Those are the flagship states. And about 10% of all college students attend one of those flagship state institutions. In this exercise, Pepsi represents all of the highly, highly selective private institutions. And when we're talking about highly selective private institutions, we're talking about any institution that admits less than 50% of its applicant pool. And that's only about 8% of college enrollments in the United States. The other 82% of people attend someplace else. And so what we want to start with is getting away from the myth that there's only a small handful of colleges and universities that, one, students attend, or two, that are worth really aiming for in this process. When in actuality, there are over 4,000 accredited colleges and universities in the United States, all of which offer a pretty good educational experience depending on what your needs are and what your expectations are for college. And so when we think about schools that might be on your list now, schools that you're considering, schools that are in your head, particularly if you're a high school junior or a sophomore, consider why you're thinking about those schools. It could be that your parents went there. Certainly my kids are, because both my wife and I went to the same institution, they're subject to that natural pressure to say, oh, wouldn't it be great to go where mom and dad went? It could be a school that a friend of yours goes to. It could be that you went there for an athletic camp or an arts camp and you had a good experience, so you equate that to liking that college or university. Oftentimes it's well, they're highly ranked by, and you can name your ranking agency, US News or whomever. Maybe it's a school you saw a poster in the college office for, and it looked really cool because somebody was rowing on a river somewhere and that looked exciting, or whatever might be interesting to you. Or, you've seen them on ESPN because they happen to have a big time sports program in basketball or in football. And so that's how you know their name. And so this type of name recognition is certainly useful in that it helps you be aware that colleges and universities are out there. But if you approach this college search process just by focusing on the schools that you think you know, then you are really limiting your scope and really running the risk of not finding an institution that really would be best for you in this process. And so, sorry, having a slight technical issue here. So what I'm asking you to do when you're starting off this process and finding what we call the ideal you is to take a personal inventory. And in other words, ask yourself, what do you want from your college experience? And the personal inventory will consist of sort of the main decision-making factors that go into selecting a college. So obviously, first and foremost, academic interests. What do you think you want to study? The size of classes, size of the overall student population. Of course, location comes into play for a wide variety of reasons. Campus culture, where do you think you're going to fit in? And really importantly, too, is how you're going to spend your free time, because the college experience is about more than what happens in the classroom. And so we're going to go into a little detail on each of these to explain what we're talking about. So let's begin with academic interest. Hopefully, this is the primary reason why you're choosing a college. Hopefully, you're looking at college first and foremost to get a great education, to learn something that's going to be useful for you over the course of your life, expand your horizons, and ultimately come out a more well-rounded and better informed citizen. And so as you're thinking about academic interests, what you want to look at are first things that you might be interested in studying. Typically, that's going to be informed by either things that you're particularly good at in high school or things that you deem might connect you to a career that you're considering. And usually students approach this by thinking about, this is what I want to major in. This is going to be my primary source of focus. So I'm going to major in psychology or political science or sociology or biology. But in addition to that, not everybody is going to want to study just one thing. And so that's where you have to think about minors or concentrations, whether or not you can do that in the institution that you're considering. Some institutions encourage students to take minors and concentrations. Other institutions encourage you to just focus on your one major force of study. So looking at the offerings becomes important. But as you're looking at the offerings, also keep in mind, not just do they offer something that you think you're interested in now, but also consider, are they offering something that you might be interested in later? So at my institution where I work currently, Salve Regina University, we have a program at our school called Cultural and Historic Preservation. The CHP program is not something that most students in high school would be thinking about going into. It's a very small program, and it's really for students that are interested in going into careers, either working as a cultural historicist for a municipality, or interested in renovating old structures, or they're interested in museum studies, things of that nature. So it tends to be a pretty narrow population of people. And a lot of people don't initially go to college thinking they want to be CHP majors. They end up being CHP majors because they go to college and they take a class in that area and they go, oh my gosh, wow, that's really interesting. And that blends a whole bunch of other areas that I'm interested in. Maybe I'll go this route. So you want to leave yourself open to be able to move around, because part of the college experience is that exploration process of finding who you are and finding what really excites you. That's one of the reasons why I often tell students that it's perfectly okay to be undecided in this process. And if you're going to be undecided in this process, this consideration of what major offerings are at an institution becomes even more important, because you want to know that as you're exploring, that there's going to be options available for you based on the things that you're interested in, but also the things that you might find along the way. You also want to think a little bit about how the academic program is structured. So for example, at larger institutions, sometimes academic programs are structured into individual schools. You might have a school of business, or a school of nursing, or a school of health sciences, or a school of engineering. Whereas at other institutions, perhaps it's everything's under the general institutional umbrella, and you have individual academic departments. Why is this important? Because in some cases, if you're admitted to a specific school, it may or may not be easy to move in and out of that school to either take courses in other areas, or if you change your direction, to move out of that academic school into another academic school at that university. So just understand what the structure of the academic program is and why it's structured that way. It also, if it's a school approach versus an academic department approach, may affect what your either core curriculum or all college curriculum, or various electives that you have to or can take in the process. Many institutions have a defined set of academic criteria that you have to complete in order for you to ultimately graduate, to make sure that students have a more holistic view of the world, rather than just specializing in one area all the time. And how that is structured and set up may also be something that impacts what works for you best in your, at least in terms of your learning experience and your desired learning environment. Think about direct entry programs for specialty programs. Are they direct entry, or are they something you have to work your way into? So for example, I mentioned sort of schools of nursing. There are nursing programs out there where if you're admitted to the school, you are in the nursing program and you're guaranteed a clinical spot, and you stay in the nursing program for as long as you want. There are other institutions that'll say you can come in with an intention to be in nursing, but you don't actually get into that nursing program until after your freshman year, after you've proven yourself. So as you're looking at some business programs, engineering programs, nursing programs, other health sciences programs, PT programs, things like that, make sure you know if they are direct entry or if they're kind of a pathway that you have to work your way through hoops and hurdles in order to stay in that program or get into that program once you're at the college, because that may also impact your decision-making process. We talked a little bit about, be ready to change direction, academic focus, and know that there's places for you to do so. If you're somebody that thinks you want to do research, that might impact the type of institution that you choose, because at some institutions it's easier to do research with faculty. Others, it may be getting in line and sort of fighting for one spot out of 100. And so if research is something you're interested in, keep that in mind. And then if you want to do study abroad or study away, some institutions really focus on that. Other institutions, it's an afterthought. So depending on how important that is to you and your academic experience, keep that in mind as you're researching institutions. Now, size also matters when you're considering schools. Some people work very well in an environment with a lot of people. Some people like to navigate that and are perfectly fine in larger classes. Other people need a small class experience. And so as you're researching colleges and universities, typically they fall into one of these 5 categories. So very small schools are schools with less than 2,000 students. They tend to be highly personalized, very small classes. You're going to know everybody on campus, very tight community. Similarly, small schools are between sort of 2,000 and 5,000. Then as you get bigger, you've got medium-sized schools that are 5,000 to 10,000, large schools 10,000 to 15,000, and then of course the very, very large big, huge behemoth institutions that in some cases have more than 15,000 and sometimes 40 and 50,000 undergraduates. And that makes them in many ways a small city. So you've got to decide what type of environment is going to be best for you and for your learning style. Some people very comfortable in a large environment, other people much more comfortable in a small, more intimate space. So think about who you are and how you're best going to learn and be able to navigate the life and experience of the college depending on size. There's also, as we think about size, we also tend to think about institutional type. So you have public institutions. Public institutions are basically institutions that receive a good portion of their funding for operational expenses from a entity, i.e. a state. So, I live in Rhode Island, the University of Rhode Island College, those are public institutions. The institution I went to, Binghamton University, part of the State University of New York system, is a public institution. Private institutions are not receiving a large portion of their budget from state funds. Now, they do receive some funds from states and federal governments, as most institutions do, but the primary source of funding for a private institution is either from tuition dollars or from other types of fundraising. There's also religiously affiliated institutions. So Brandeis University, a place that I've had the privilege of working in my career, is sponsored by the American Jewish community. It's not a religious institution, but there's a cultural aspect to that there. Salve Regina University, where I work now, is a Catholic institution sponsored by the Sisters of Mercy religious order. So if that's something that you want, that may impact the type of culture that you're going to find on campus. Then there's 2-year or 4-year institutions. 2-year institutions, typically known as community colleges, but not always community colleges. Some are more technical schools. Others are schools that have a 2-year degree, but would not fall into the community college category because that's really a public designation. And then 4-year schools are what most people think of for college. They are the bachelor's degree granting institutions. And then, of course, you have to think about Carnegie classifications. If you don't know what Carnegie classifications are, usually it has to do with the size as well as the research orientation of the university. So you may have heard of what are called Research 1 institutions. These are typically rather large institutions that are receiving a lot of funds, federal, state, private funding to support the research activities of some pretty high-profile faculty members that you may or may not cross paths with during your experience there. I have a question here about what's sort of the average class size for these different size type institutions. It's gonna vary based on the way the institution is structured and the way the institution is focused. So, but you can usually expect that you're gonna have smaller classes at smaller institutions and larger classes at larger institutions, at least in the introductory courses. So I mentioned, Binghamton University, my alma mater, big school. That does not mean that all the classes there were all big. In my freshman year, when I went to college at Binghamton, I had a freshman class that was 250 in my first semester. I had another that was 450 in my first semester. I had one that was 150 in my first semester. And then I had another class that had 50. So they weren't all big, huge, what you would call lecture hall classes. Similarly, there are some small institutions that may mostly have small classes of, 40 or fewer, but may have for certain academic areas or for certain introductory courses, sort of one big lecture that you might take that might have a couple hundred students. So each school is going to be different depending on how they've structured their curriculum and what their offerings are. Now, in addition to size and academic program, another big driver of decision-making process is, of course, location. And location is important both for your comfort and the type of experience you might be looking for, but also for how the institution engages with the community. And so as you think about institutions, usually they fall sort of in the rural, no definition required, suburban or urban campuses. So, my brother went to Rutgers the New Brunswick campus of Rutgers. It's sort of an urban campus. It feels like a city when you're there because there's a lot of high-rise buildings and lots of streets. A suburban campus is going to be someplace that might be attached to a college town. And then rural campuses are exactly what you would think of in rural campuses. So someplace that might be a little bit away from a town setting, someplace that might be further afield from a large urban center, a little bit longer to get to depending on the location, but that may offer certain things and certain academic programs that you wouldn't offer in a suburban or urban campus environment. And so what really fits you and your personality might drive what type of area you're looking for in terms of a campus. The other big, determining factor for a lot of people as they're thinking about colleges is distance from home. And I often like to boil this down to the concept of how much time do you want to spend with your parents? Do you want to be able to see your parents whenever you want, all the time? Mom and dad might pop on campus on a regular basis for dinner. Or do you want to know that you can see your parents when you can, but they've got to call first because they want to make sure you're around before they just show up on campus? Or do you only want to see your parents on holidays? That's one way to think about distance from campus because, if you're living in California and you're going to school in the Northeast, then that's a long ways away, and you're not going to be going back and forth on the weekends by plane, unless you happen to be independently wealthy, to visit your family. But if you're in California and you happen to live in Los Angeles and you go to UCLA, maybe you'll, see mom and dad more regularly. So think about what type of distance you want to be away from home, and if that's important to you. It may not be important in your decision-making process, but for some people it is. Think about, do you want a residential campus or a commuter campus? If you're thinking about living on campus, do you want to be someplace where pretty much everybody else is living on campus? Or are you looking for some place that you might live at home and commute to, and others may have the same experience? And that will impact what the campus life is like, whether or not it's a heavy focus on residential or commuter. You also want to think about not only the school's location in terms of how the institution is structured, but also what type of engagement that might mean for the community that you're in. So, I mentioned I worked at Salve, and they got a picture below of Salve Regina University, which is on an island in Rhode Island. Rhode Island itself not being an island if you're just tuning in, but Aquidneck Island, where Salve is located, is an island. And that impacts the type of experience that we have in terms of how we interact with the community. It's a beach community, so students go to the beach, students surf. But it's also a place where, if you think about internships, students will find a lot of internships in things like historic studies, tourism studies, hospitality management. Lots of internships structured around the way the community is structured. And so you want to think about not only what type of environment you're going to go in from a comfort and feel standpoint, but also how you're going to interact with that community when you are there. Which leads a bit to campus culture. It's important that you find a campus culture that is going to be someplace where you feel like you can belong, that you feel like you can be comfortable, that you feel like you can grow and develop. Now, sometimes that means you want to go someplace where people are completely different from you and you're going to be challenged by that. I mentioned my alma mater earlier. I went to my alma mater, which is a state school in New York State, from a small town in Connecticut. It was culture shock for me as a freshman because I was with a very, very different environment of students that I'd ever experienced before. I didn't know anybody on campus when I got there because no one from my high school or my hometown had ever gone there before. And so I was kind of striking out on my own. And so for some students, that's what they want to do. They want that opportunity to sort of strike out on their own, find their own thing. For other students, you're going to want some place that feels a little bit more like home. You're going to want some place where you can have that comfort of knowing you're going to find people like you that have similar experiences from you. And neither is right or wrong. This is just about personal preference and finding what's going to work for you. So the friendliness of a campus, the diversity of a campus. Is it a suitcase school? What does that mean? Basically, the concept of the suitcase school is that, is it a place where everybody, lives on campus, goes home on the weekends to go back and spend time with their friends at home? Or do they stick around and they engage in activities on the campus? Again, not making judgment that one or the other is better. It's about what is going to work for you. Is there a strong sports culture on campus? So, I think about my cousin in her college search process. It was very important for her. She wanted to go to school with big time sports because she wanted that environment in which to experience college. That was her vision of what college should be. Conversely, I'm an artistic person, and so I was really wanted a place where the arts were important. So those types of cultural differences matter. What type of academic engagement is happening? Is it mostly what happens in the classroom, or is there a lot of academic engagement outside the classroom? Clubs and organizations, faculty involved with student organizations. What's the approach to the academic environment? Is it sort of all academic all the time? Is it someplace where, you go to class, you do your work, and then you go on and do other things? Everybody has a different preference in terms of what type of academic experience they want. What types of traditions are big on the campus, and are those traditions that you want to be a part of? And then, Greek life also comes into the issues of campus culture. Some people want Greek life, some people don't. Some institutions, Greek life is the cornerstone of social life on campus. Other institutions have Greek life, but it's not really a big part of the experience. And lots of institutions have no Greek life at all. So just what are you sort of expecting from college? And is that something that's going to be important to you? All of this goes into the decision-making process and finding that ideal you. But more importantly than all of this to me is thinking about how you're going to spend your free time. Because while we think about college as this academic endeavor, and that's the first big thing, it's also a social experience where you develop into the person that you want to be. And a lot of that happens outside of the traditional classroom setting. And I often think about it in terms of the amount of hours that you're spending at your institution. If there's 168 hours in a week, hopefully you'll sleep for about 56. Chances are you might only sleep for about 40 or 45, depending on who you are as a student. Others will sleep for 60 or 65. But on average, if you're getting sort of your 8 hours, you're going to get 56 hours of sleep. And you're going to be in class for another 15 hours a week. So if you're on a 5-course schedule, typically it's 3 hours of class time. That's your 15 hours. That leaves 97 hours left to fill. And contrary to what parents want to believe, you're not going to spend 97 hours a week studying or in the library or in the lab. And so what are you going to fill some of those hours with? What type of activities do you want to participate in? Do you want to play a sport? That's going to take up a bunch of time. What activities do you want to try that you've maybe never considered before? And then can you do everything that you want? Back in the day when I was going through my college search experience, I was the type of student that sort of wanted to do everything. I was an athlete. I was a soccer player, so I wanted to play soccer. I was singing and doing theater, and so I wanted to sing and I wanted to do theater, and I wanted to do leadership activities like student government. And so as I was going around from college to college asking questions about, can I do these things? An interesting thing happened. Some schools would say, absolutely, do whatever you want, do all you want. Other institutions would say, and in this case, particularly, I remember being at one very, very highly selective institution that said, well, everybody here is really great. And so you kind of have to just sort of pick one thing and focus on that and be expert at that. And for me, that wasn't the experience I wanted. I wanted to sort of be jack of all trades. Some people want to focus on one thing. So finding what environment is going to work best for you becomes important. So ask a lot of questions about clubs, activities, what you can do, how you do it, and what's available. That's a big part of this process. So you may have noticed that in thinking about these components of IDOU, we talked about the academic, we talked about the social, we talked about the environmental, but I sort of skipped two biggies that are probably front of mind for a lot of people. And that is your selectivity, will I get in, and the cost of attendance. And I did that intentionally because while these two things are important, they are a piece of the consideration process, but should not be your starting point. You'll get to these points, but start your research with these as sort of in a vacuum. Not worried about selectivity and cost until after I begin to develop a list of colleges that I might be interested in. So as you're thinking about what's your ideal you, what's your best place for you, think about the other things first, and then start to layer these into the equation. So let's talk a bit about selectivity. Selectivity is an interesting construct, and one that, as somebody that's been in higher education for a lot of years, and I mentioned before, I've worked at some really selective schools, some of the most selective schools, and everything to open enrollment. And I can tell you from that experience that selectivity does not necessarily equal quality of education. We in the United States think that we have to quantify everything and be able to say that more selective is better and less selective is worse, when in actuality that is not really true. But as you're considering colleges, you do have to take selectivity into consideration because you have to be honest about your level of academic achievement. You have to be able to be very honest about yourself, about how you've performed in high school, what grades you've gotten, what types of courses have you taken? Have you taken sort of a general studies pathway? Have you taken a college prep pathway? Have you taken a more advanced, AP, IB, honors curriculum pathway? All of this comes into play as you're applying to certain colleges and universities. And, unfortunately, test scores for some institutions matter as well. So you have to think about all these things. You also have to understand that your high school GPA is not necessarily the GPA that the college admissions office is looking at. In college admissions circles, as you get more selective, schools are going to focus first and foremost more on your 4 core academic subject areas, your math, your social science, your science, and your English. And not necessarily as much on some of the other very, very important curricular aspects of your high school curriculum, but that are not in the core subject areas, the core competencies coming out of high school. And so as you think about your GPA, you may look at your GPA and say, oh, wow, I've got a 3.2 GPA. But what's pulling you up to a 3.2 is all of the non-academic courses, all of the courses that are outside of those 4 curricular areas. And so you have to be honest about your GPA as you're approaching this college search process. And you also have to consider, the weighting scale of your high school. So as you're looking at different schools, and you may see, well, gee, most people at this school have a B+ average, and I have a B+ average, I should get in. Not necessarily. It's gonna depend on how your transcript is viewed based on not only the grades, but also the courses you took, which courses you did well in, and trend of grades. All of that's important. So you need to ask the right questions when you're interacting with admissions offices about how the application is viewed, what information is utilized, what matters more. So if you're applying for a nursing program, sciences are going to matter more than if you're applying to a humanities program. If you're applying to an engineering program, math is going to matter a lot, but maybe not as much English. So all of these are important considerations in this process. And so I have here just sort of an example of what we're talking about. We took sort of Joe Student. And with Joe Student, we made them pretty darn average. 1,100 is about the average SAT score of all SAT takers. That equates to about a 22 on the ACT. And we gave Joe Student a B average in college prep courses. So Joe Student's doing fine. Joe Student is not excelling, but Joe Student is certainly not doing poorly. Joe Student is a middle of the road, good bread and butter kid. And Joe's student is looking at a number of different schools. At school A, the average SAT, middle 50%, falls between 1080 and 1340. Now, most schools are going to show their test scores as middle 50%. What that means is 25% fall below this range and 25% of students fall above this range. But on average, most students fall between a 1080 and a 1340 on a 1600 scale. So this is the critical reasoning and math portion of the SAT. That equates to about a 23 to 31 on the ACT. At school A, most students have, on average, a B average coming out of high school, and they admit 83% of their applicant pool. At school B has a middle 50% SAT score of 1460 to 1570, pretty darn high, or 33 to 35 in the ACT, and the average GPA of a student coming in is an A average. These are kids that, for A minus, that's a problem. And as a result, they admit 5% of their applicant pool. If you think really hard, you could probably guess one of, 6 schools that this might be. And then, school C has a middle 50% SAT between 1080 and 1380, an ACT of 24 to 30, B plus A minus average on average for students, and a 62% acceptance rate. Now, if you're Joe's student, you can apply to all these schools. And if they are all the right fit for you, Joe's student should apply to all these schools. But Joe's students is probably not going to get into all of these schools. Joe's students probably get into school A without a problem. Joe's student has a good shot of getting into school C. They admit 62% of their applicant pool, but no guarantees. And Joe's student's going to be playing the lottery to get into school B. And frankly, anybody applying to college with a 5% accepted rate is playing the lottery to get into school B. Now, my point here about admit rate and selectivity is that all 3 of these schools are excellent schools. School A is a flagship public institution with an excellent reputation for research. They are an institution that has grown in notoriety for a number of years. They have become very national in their recruitment, and you would be surprised at just how good of an education there is there. But they accept 83% of their applicant pool because of their location. And their location is they're in a part of the country where there's not a lot of college-bound students, and it's a part of the country that you're not going to find a ton of students necessarily jumping to go to outside of going to this institution. So school A's 83% acceptance rate is not a reflection on the quality of the education that a student is going to receive there. It's a reflection on the number of students that apply. Whereas school B is also known as an excellent institution, considered to be one of the top schools, in part because of their acceptance rate. But why is their acceptance rate as low as it is? Because people perceive it to be the gold standard of institutions. And so everybody applies, even people that have no business applying. People will just throw out an application and say, I applied to this school. And that drives down the acceptance rate. School C is an excellent small liberal arts college, one with a great reputation, one that you would be very proud to display your diploma on your wall in your office. Chances are, if you came out of this institution, you're going to have a great career. You're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to be a professor, you're going to be somebody great. The 62% acceptance rate does not equate to their reputation. But again, because they are in a part of the country where there are less students, it's a little bit more of a suburban, less urban environment trending towards the rural, they're not getting as many applications as school B. And so their acceptance rate is a little bit higher. So the point in all of this is that you think about selectivity. Don't use selectivity to cloud your judgment in thinking that this is a better school or a worse school. Selectivity is really just a function of supply and demand. And how many people apply? Because of our perception, not necessarily because of the quality of education that students will receive. So again, admit rate, mathematical construct. Another thing that I think people need to understand about selectivity is I think a lot of people think that everybody goes to schools that are less than 50% admit rates. And if you don't get into a school, somehow you've done a terrible job in this process. Nothing could be further from the truth. Only 8% of colleges and universities in the United States admit less than 50% of their applicant pool. And only 16% more admit between 50 and 75% of their applicant pool. That means that 76% of colleges and universities in the United States admit more than 75% of their applicants. So if you're going into this process and you're concerned, will I get into college? Chances are you're going to get into college as long as you are looking at yourself in a very appropriate way. You're being honest to yourself. You're being honest about where you apply to. You're being honest about your academic criteria for admission. You're going to get into a great school and you're going to do very well. Don't worry about that. I think the stress that we have put on students, particularly over the last 20 years, is unconscionable. We've made admission to college the entire label by which someone is judged, and that should not be the case. It's about what you do in college, not about where you get in or if you get into one of these highly selected schools. Put another way, only 11% of college students at bachelor's degree institutions attend a highly selective institution. 20% attend a selective institution. The other 69% attend a moderately selective or a broad access institution. And graduates of all these institutions are successful in life. So keep that in mind as you're considering selectivity. Let's also talk a little bit about cost, because cost has become a huge driver in the college selection process, because college is perceived correctly to be pretty expensive. That's because it is a labor-intensive field and business model. You don't go to college to learn from a video or from a module. You're learning from highly educated professionals who have done a lot of study and important learning to get to this point. These people, have to be compensated. And so college does not come free. However, when we're thinking about colleges and we're thinking about costs, I do want to dispel some myths. So a lot of people think, well, public is expensive public is affordable and private is expensive. The truth is sometimes public is not affordable and sometimes private is not expensive. It all depends on your financial situation. It also depends on the type of aid that institutions can provide. So when you think about public institutions, a lot of public institutions may have a lower sticker price, but they don't necessarily give out much in terms of need-based or merit-based aid beyond what's eligible to students through the federal formula. And therefore, sometimes the private institution becomes less expensive because the private institution has a different funding model for how they provide aid. And so as you're looking at this process, don't use public or private as the driver of your initial decisions of where to apply and where to consider. When it all comes down at the end, net cost is going to be part of the equation of making the final decision, but open yourself up to the idea that you may be able to go for a private institution for less expensive than a public institution. Also, dispel yourself of the belief that everybody gets a free ride to college or that everybody gets a lot of college covered. The reality is that only 1.5% of all bachelor's degree students get a free ride. And so this idea, this myth that there's all these full scholarships out there to college is just that, a myth. It doesn't exist. Even as you get into, some higher percentage of coverage of cost of attendance, 2.7% of students receive 90% of cost of attendance, 5.9% receive 75% of cost of attendance, and only 18.8% of students receive 50% cost of attendance. So a lot of students are paying for college, again, because there is a cost to educating a student. Also, a point on athletic scholarships. Everybody seems to think that if you have a student that's a great athlete, that they're going to get an athletic scholarship, and nothing could be further from the truth. Only 2% of high school athletes receive an athletic scholarship, and most athletic scholarships are less than $11,000 a year. So even though there are full scholarships for basketball, at Duke, most students, the vast majority, will never see that. And so don't think that athletics is going to be this pathway to free college, because it won't. At most schools, the reality is the cost of educating a student is more than the cost of attendance in terms of what students actually pay in tuition and fees. In the case of public institutions, they're covering that balance from aid that's coming from the state, that's supporting the operational expenses, as well as some of the auxiliary expenses are things like construction and building maintenance and things of that nature. And at private institutions, they're generally relying on endowment and other fun ways to bring in funds and raise revenue to support the cost of attendance for a student. But for most students, when it comes down to their net cost of attendance, they're paying less than it actually costs to educate. And so that's why net cost becomes really important in this equation, not sticker price. It's also important to note that, I hear a lot of people lately saying, well, very few people should be taking loans or do take loans for college. Actually, 70% of college students are taking loans. Now, some of them need those loans and some of them don't. Some of them are doing it just to, push off the cost of attendance for a while, but they could pay. That's all family choice. But the key in this is every family, regardless of your financial situation, should complete the free application for student aid, the FAFSA, because you want to know that there's going to be aid available to you, and everybody receives some form of aid when you fill out the FAFSA. So what's next? We've talked a little bit about ideal you, what criteria you should put together to create this concept of the right school for you. So after you've created ideal you, what you need to do is you need to do your research and take all of those components and plug them in so you can find the schools that match. There's a lot of ways you can do this. There's a lot of college search engines out there. If you just go into Google and type college search, you're going to get a whole bunch of places where you can go and start researching colleges and put in things like your academic program, your size, location, distance from home, all of those criteria we talked about, and start getting lists of schools. If you're a Naviance school, you can also do that at school. Naviance has a tool for that. Same thing, I think, for SCORE, if you're at a SCORE school. So there's a lot of different places you can do that. You can also go to college fairs. Hopefully, sometime soon, we'll see college fairs again, and you can go and talk to admissions representatives. Admissions representatives go to high schools to talk to students. And then, of course, go to the college websites. Once you're looking at schools you're interested in, spend some time on each college's website. It's going to give you an idea of the campus culture, find out what resources are available, what they offer. You'll find everything there. Virtual tours, great tool, have obviously exploded in the last couple months. Schools that didn't have virtual tours 2 months ago all of a sudden have virtual tours because they had to. And so there's a lot of different versions of virtual tours out there that will give you an idea of what the campus is like before you even set foot. So lots of sources that you can use. As you're doing your research, I do want to make a note about rankings, because lots of people tend to focus on college rankings. And I feel about college rankings the way I feel about selectivity. It's a tool. It's a piece of the process. It should not be the cornerstone of your decision-making process. Why? Because you have to think that every ranking system has its own methodology, and that methodology is a reflection of the creator of that instrument. There is no perfect methodology for ranking or surveying a college and determining what is better or not. It's frankly, opinion. And so you may see some consistency of opinion across various ranking platforms, and that may help. But if you're just going to rely on US News, you're not entering this process in a way that is going to help you find a place that is best for you. It's going to force you into a small list of schools that someone else has decided is best. And rankings don't know anything about you. They don't know who you are. They don't know your experience. They don't know how you learn best. They don't know what type of culture works best for you. So again, rankings are a tool. They're a place to plug in to kind of get an idea, but they should not be the cornerstone of your decision-making process. So you've done all this research. Now you can sort of make your list to get a little bit more in depth too. And I think that 20 schools is a good place to start. I'm not saying apply to 20 schools. We'll get that to that in a second. But 20 schools is a good place to start. It's a manageable pool to do some in-depth research. And basically the question you should be asking yourself is, can I imagine myself at this school? If you can't imagine yourself there, take it off the list. Don't go further. And in this process, you also want to start thinking about the concept of reach schools, accessible schools, and safety schools. So going back to Joe's student, school B was a reach school, school A was it was a safety school, and school C was accessible. Chances pretty good that he was going to get in there. So when it comes down to ultimately making the list of schools where you're going to apply, having some reach, some accessible, and some safety in your final list is going to be important to making sure that you have some choice at the end of this process. Use your school counselor. School counselors don't know everything about all 4,000 colleges and universities in the country, but they do know a lot about quite a few, and they know you. And so if you run your list by them, they're going to be able to help provide some context about whether you're heading in the right direction or whether you might want to consider some other options. Trust their opinion. They've been doing this in some cases many, many years, and they have your best interest at heart. Then request information. And I know people, a lot of people joke about the deluge of information that they get from colleges, but it's an important part of the process. If you're going to do research on something, you want information. If you're going to buy a car, you want the catalog so you can take a look and see if it has all the, various bells and whistles that you want, or the right color, or, same thing for colleges. You want the catalog. You want to be able to see what they have to offer. They're also, nowadays, with technology, we as colleges have gotten pretty sophisticated. And if you are pretty specific about what you're looking for, colleges will be very specific about talking to you about what they have that matches what you're looking for. So if you're interested in majoring in biology and you tell a college that, you're going to get information about the biology program. That's important for research. Also, get on so in order to do that, you got to get on each school's list. So I strongly encourage people, make an email address just for the college search process. You don't want to clog up your inbox with, just information, all college information. That could be a bit overwhelming. You want to use the tools. Sorry, I was looking at a question here. You want to use the tools available to you. So create a specific email address for this process. Part of the other thing a lot of people are starting to come to understand about college admissions is that what's called demonstrated interest matters. So by talking to colleges, by engaging with colleges, colleges are going to track that information, and they're going to know that you're interested in them, and that's going to help them when they go into the application review process. So for a while, a big thing that was in college admissions was called stealth admissions, where people would research colleges, not tell the colleges they were interested in, and the first time a college would hear of you was when you applied. The downside of that is, particularly in more selective institutions, if you do that, then the institution doesn't know that you're really interested in them. They may think you just threw out an application, because it's easy to apply to college. The Common App makes it easy to apply to college. So it's in your best interest to get on a school that you're considering their list early and to receive their information. create a file or a box for each school so you can collect all this information together. You're probably going to need a much bigger box for everything else that you're going to get in the mail. But you're going to find the information useful in helping to learn more about each individual institution you're considering. Then, of course, visit. And hopefully, sooner than later, we'll be able to visit colleges again and you'll be able to get on campus. Lots of ways that you can visit. One way is just the drop-in, just showing up on a campus, walking around, getting a sense, is it the right place for you? If you have some local campuses, I encourage you to do some drop-ins just to get a sense of different sizes of campuses and different types of campuses, because you'll get a context for this whole process. But then there's, of course, the formalized campus tour, the opportunity to hear from a tour guide who knows about the campus, that can tell you everything about every building and all the different activities on campus. If a campus offers an opportunity to do an interview, do it. It's a great way to get to know the campus. More often than not, the interview is what's called informational. It's an opportunity for the admissions office to learn a little bit about you, but it's more about you learning about the college. It's not, for a lot of schools, it's not a big part of the application process, but it is a designated interest. And so if you take the time to do an interview, that's going to be logged, and that's going to, be something that your admissions counselor reviewing your application is going to remember and treat well. Program specific events, if you're interested in engineering and the school has an engineering day, go to that, learn about the specific program. General open houses are great ways to learn about just overall life on campus. And get to know your admissions counselor. Admissions counselors want to know you. They tend to be pretty social people. And so they want to create a relationship with you. And if they get to know you, then they have context for your application that they can't see on the paper and the essay and other activities that you're going to put there. So don't be afraid to communicate. Remember, each engagement is tracked. Now, come September, now you're going to have to narrow down to which schools you're going to apply to. I highly recommend not applying to more than 10 schools. Once upon a time, I used to say 6. I know that 6 is no longer in vogue, and so nobody wants to hear 6, so I've upped it to 10. But really, if you're doing this process right, if you're doing your research, if you're being honest about yourself, you should really only need to apply to about 10 schools. And ask yourself, can you imagine yourself at each of these? If you can't imagine yourself at that school, don't apply there. There's 4,000 colleges and universities in the country. There's no reason getting down to 10 schools for you to apply someplace that you have no interest in ever going. Again, think about, do you have an admissible safety, a place that you're absolutely sure you're going to get in, and this is where the school counselor is going to help you, because they have graphs and historic data that they can go back to and say, if you look like this, you're going to get in, and if you look like this, you're not going to get in, and if you look like this, you have a X percentage chance to get in. So apply someplace you are 99.9% sure you're going to get in, so you have one right out of the way. Apply to a financial safety. This typically will be a public school, but it may also be a private school that your school counselor knows about that gives a lot of aid because you happen to be at the high end of their admissibility pool, or they happen to be very well known for giving out need-based aid and you happen to be a needy student. So have a financial safety in this process too, because if cost of attendance is important to you and a concern for your family, you want to have that financial safety. And then by all means, have a reach school. Everybody should have a reach school. Everybody should have a dream. But understand that, when you're applying to schools, it's okay not to get into every school. This is not a competition to apply to 10 and get into 10. You type A's out there, I know, hate me saying that, but it's really about letting the process run its course so you would end up someplace where you're going to be happy and be successful. Also, going back to the demonstration we did with Joe College student, Ivy League schools are never safety schools, nor are they admissible schools, range of admissible schools. I don't care how good of a student you are. Any institution that admits 5% of their applicant pool is picking and choosing who they want based on a variety of criteria. Ivy League schools could fill their enrollment classes 30 times over with admissible students in their applicant pool. But Supply and demand makes it so that doesn't happen. So always make sure you have an admissible safety. Understand the application options. There's 3 ways that most students will apply to schools. They'll either apply through an early program, early action, or early decision. What's the difference? Early action is a non-binding program, meaning that you can apply to other schools. You don't have to commit if you get accepted if you apply early. Typically what happens if you apply by an early date, usually somewhere around November 1, you're going to get a decision by Christmas and you're going to know. But you still have the entire process to make a decision. Early decision schools is a binding process by which you make a contract with that institution that if you get in and they admit you, you're going to withdraw your applications from all other schools. In my opinion, you should not be applying to a school early decision unless you are absolutely sure that that is the only place in the world that you want to go and you have the financial resources to make it a reality. If finances are a concern for you, don't apply early decision. Focus on either EA or regular decision. And then regular decision usually is the last possible deadline that you can apply for admission to a school. The common application makes it easy to apply to multiple schools using generic essay prompts. You do everything in one place. You apply to a bunch of schools. It's done. Not every school is on the common application. Some states have their own state application. Some people are using a variety of other applications to apply. But if you fill out the common application, you've got 90% of what most schools are going to ask for, and so that you can then use that information to apply to other schools. This summer is a great time to work on your personal statement. Think about what you want to write, how you want to write it. The personal statement is not something that you write in an hour on a Sunday evening. It is something that you take time with. And if you want more information on sort of creating a personal statement, the Office of Admissions at Salve is going to be offering a workshop on that over the next couple of weeks. There's a couple different workshops. I invite you to participate in that to learn more about the personal statement. Don't be modest in your application. I sometimes joke, don't write down I swim too. Tell me your times. Tell me why you're great at it. You want to let colleges know what is special about you. Everybody is special. Everybody has something that's unique to them. We want to know about that. And be honest about yourself. Don't make things up. Don't be modest, but don't pretend you're somebody that you're not. We want to see who you are in your application, in your personal statement, so that we can understand if you're a right fit for the institution and if the institution is the right fit for you. Then after you've done all this, you've applied to schools. Hopefully you've gotten a good number of admissions. If you apply to 10 schools, shoot for 5 to 6 admissions. Then you have some choice. Again, you don't have to get into all 10. This is not a competition to see how many schools you get into. This is about ending up at the right place. So after you've done that and you've narrowed down your list to schools that you're really seriously considering, go back and visit again. Go to accepted student days. I highly recommend class visits if you can do it, because that's an opportunity for you to sit in on a class and see what the experience is really like. Ask lots of questions. It always surprises me when people take the time to go visit a campus and then don't ask any questions. You've got questions. There's things that you want to know. Ask them of professionals like me. Ask them of tour guides. But then get off the beaten path, get away from the tour, get away from the, pre-programmed presentation that we're giving you, and go ask students on the street what their experience is like. Their answers and how they approach you will give you an impression of what the culture is like on that campus. And you're also going to get very honest feedback. Last but certainly not least, eat the food. If you're going to be living on campus, you want to know what the food's like. So go into the cafeteria, have some food, get a sense of what the food is really like, and if it's something that's palatable to you. Then, as you're making your final decisions, you're going to need to revisit your assessment. We go back to your ideal you. Let's say you did your personal inventory now in your high school junior. Believe it or not, how you feel today may change dramatically in 9 months. How have your impressions of what you're thinking about college should be changed? What have you learned about yourself through the process about what you need to be successful? I sometimes hear a lot from parents, because I work at a small school, and I hear from students a lot of times that say, I really, really thought I wanted to go to a big school because I wanted all this activity and I had this vision of what college should be. But after going through the process, I realized what I really need is a small environment where I'm going to get a lot of personal attention. These are the types of self-discoveries that you're going to have through the college search process. That's what makes it a process. It's not just I'm going to randomly pick a bunch of schools, apply to it, and be done. You need to consider yourself and be open to the fact that you are growing and you're changing, and your views on the world are constantly evolving. It's okay for your decision-making process to evolve with them. You're going to find out things when you're taking tours and visiting campuses that you didn't even initially consider about colleges, and that's going to inform your final decision. What connections have you made? You may get to know a faculty member on a campus and say, wow, I really want to study with that person. And also think about, did the reality of the school that you were thinking about 9 months ago live up to the hype? You may have thought when you started the process that X school looked incredible, and why would you think about any place else? And at the end of it, you may find that that school is not where you wanted to be. In actuality, you needed to be someplace else. That is exactly what happened to me in my college search process. I was 100% laser focused on one school. And I visited there a couple times, and every time I visited, I became less enchanted with the place. Whereas the school that I ended up with was probably an afterthought as I started the process. And after spending time researching and going there, I realized, wow, this is the exact perfect place for me. Be open to the fact that this process will change you and change your perceptions on what you need and where you're going to be most successful. Part of this is sort of doing a pro and con review. What's the pro of this institution? What's the con of this institution? Deciding which are the things that are most important to you. Take the time. This is an important choice you're going to make. It's a big investment financially. So you're going to want to take the time to be intentional about the process. And then at the end of it, I got to tell you, you can throw all the research out of the way and follow your gut, because you're going to go on certain college campuses and you're going to say, wow, this is home. This is where I think I belong. And I refer a lot, the late Alan Krugman, who was an economist at Princeton University, did a lot of study about selectivity in admissions and enrollment. And what his research found was that it wasn't about selectivity that led to success. It was about the student and how they engage with an institution that led to success. And so if you are going someplace where you're going to be happy, chances are you're going to engage and you're going to be involved and you're going to make the most of that experience. And you have a better chance of being successful there than going to an institution that on paper looks the best, but isn't the right place for you. Because success in college is as much about being comfortable and feeling you're in the right place that leads to success as it is about structurally what that place is. So don't be afraid to, at the end of it all, throw it all out the window and go where you know you're going to be happy. This is not a final decision to end all decisions. Another interesting factoid about the college admissions process is that about a third of all college students ultimately transfer. So it's not unusual to go someplace, find that it's not the right place for you, and then change your mind. The decision you make about where you choose to go to college from day one as a freshman is not the end of the road. You still have plenty of time to change your mind, to experience, to explore. Life is short. It does not end at 21. So you have plenty of time to go out there and experience and find yourself and find ultimately where you're going to be and find your way to success both in college and after college. So this is sort of the first in a series. It's a sort of an overview of the process. At Salve, we are trying to do our part for serving people in a time when you may not be getting all of the college search resources that you would be if you were in school right now. And so if you want to learn more about the other programs we're offering, go to salve.edu/visit. We have a whole growing menu of options there. Like I said, there we have an essay workshop coming up. We have a workshop for students interested in choosing arts programs coming up. We're going to be doing an application development process, so you know how to build your application. Lots of different ways to learn more about the college search process. We're here for you. Your school counselors are here for you, and we want to help you through this process. I'm just going to go check the box here. See, I think there's a couple more questions. Nick is asking, if I am a sophomore, would it be possible and a good idea for me to try and join the workshops for my personal statement? Absolutely. Because really writing a personal statement is about building your writing skills. And so even though a personal statement is a little bit different than a typical high school, thesis statement essay that you'd be doing, as a former English major, I can say I think that we need more good writers, and writing takes practice. So absolutely participate in our workshops, even if you're a sophomore. You're going to be ahead of the game going forward. We're just going to take one more minute just to see if anybody else has any other questions. Okay, seeing none. Thank you for joining this evening. I hope you found the information useful and helpful. If you did, again, this is going to be recorded, but we're also going to do this again in 2 weeks, I think. But check local listings. So if this was useful for you, tell your friends. They can come back, and we'll be doing this again to answer more questions that people have. Again, if you want to follow on at Salve Admit Guy on Twitter and Instagram, I'll be posting information there, and you will be able to ask me questions there, or you can email me, jim.fowler@salve.edu, and we're here to help you in this process. One last question here. Can admissions counselors help with figuring out college essay topics? Absolutely. By all, the college essay, the college personal statement, I think always poses a little bit of a challenge, because you want to be creative, but really it's about representing yourself. I would say, stay away from generic topics. For example, don't, everybody next year is going to be writing about their experience with COVID-19. Don't do that. You want to separate yourself from the pack, but you do use your school counselor, use admissions counselors, use your English teachers. Lots of people out there that can help you with college essay topics. Part of this process is just asking a lot of questions and getting a lot of information, and know that admissions people are here first and foremost to help. That's why they call us admissions counselors, not admissions reviewers. Okay, not seeing any other questions, and just a nice note here from Bill Hancock. Good things are going good with you, Bill. Again, thank you. Enjoy your evening, and I hope we have an opportunity to see people in person sometime soon. Take care.